Hello, and welcome to the Communication Solution Podcast. Here at IFIOC, we love to talk communication. We love to talk motivational interviewing, and we love talking about improving outcomes for individuals, organizations, and the communities that they serve. Today, we've got Casey Jackson on the line, John Gilbert, and I'm Tammy. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. We have a very special guest today who I'm looking forward to learn a lot more from. It's Steve Wohl. And we were talking just beforehand here about some of his experience, which he has quite a lot of. Steve, I'm going to pass it to you, but just from being a hostage commander, a SWAT commander, over 25 years of experience, there's a lot there to dig into. So if we could just get oriented to your experience, your role, that would be really helpful to start us off. And then I'm sure from there, we can dive deeper into the aspects of what you've done and how MI might fit with that, how it might not fit with it. And you and Casey can get into maybe some back and forth with that for a bit.
You bet. Thanks, John. Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, like John said, I'm Steve Wohl. I'm a 25-year veteran of the Spokane Police Department, coming up on 26 years. So I've had quite a bit of experience. I've been blessed to work in many different areas and facets of law enforcement. And some of the ones that I cherish the most have been both as my time as the hostage commander and SWAT team commander. They work together, which is great. But the hostage negotiation piece, how we deal with people, and that's how I really got to know Casey and MI, motivational interviewing, and how we can work together and how it would benefit us, benefits the people in crisis, which is ultimately our goal. And so I just continue to try to strive to bring more education, more experience, training to our team, to our department. And so we've really worked well with IFIOC and with Casey to bring that experience. So it's been great for that. And I just appreciate the opportunity to meet and chat with you guys today.
Steve, I thought this would be fascinating. You and I know each other well. And I think one of the things that I think of what struck me about doing a podcast around this is, aside from everything, all the chaos in the world, just to bring perspective or a clarity between so much of what law enforcement does. Because in some ways, I mean, even when I hear you say that, the work that you've done, in motivational interviewing, it's hard for me to think of taking two more opposite ends of the spectrum. There's law enforcement, very compliance driven, very you do this expectation, and motivational, which is so person centered. So it just feels like they are truly opposite ends of the spectrum. And we've moved closer and closer in a lot of the work that, at least I've been able to do in law enforcement and with, the police departments. And I think what I want you to start with is just start with the mindset for you specifically, especially pre-motivational interviewing. What is a mindset when there is like active shooter? Because I think this is like every single weekend we're seeing this. So, I mean, when you arrive on scene, especially just thinking post-MI, pre-MI, what's just when you arrive on scene, what are some of the just kind of core tenets of what you're thinking about in terms of safety, in terms of kind of operations?
Yeah, and I'll address the thing you brought up first of being kind of different ends of the spectrum. And I think in the 50s and 60s, I think that was more so. I think as time has come, we're kind of coming together to where at some point we're going to cross. And we're seeing that nowadays where the clinicians and the behavioral mental health piece and law enforcement are really working well together. We're doing a lot of training together and working together. We're actually putting clinicians in our cars so that we can bring a service to the people in crisis that we haven't done in the past. That's vital. And that's where I think we're going to finally get that cross where we're working together. And it's really not different ends of the spectrum like you talk about, which is so true, Casey. As far as the second piece, so law enforcement has traditionally been the group that shows up when there's a violent encounter or a crisis, and we've got to control the scene to protect lives. Our first mindset is we need to secure the scene and protect and help save any victims that may have succumbed to injuries or whatever on those violent encounters. And so when we show up, we're not necessarily thinking of the MI and behavioral mental health piece. We're looking at how can we secure the scene, make it safe, and then bring in and change gears from going 100 miles an hour to make sure it's safe and neutralize that threat, to now helping those that are in need. That's kind of our goal initially as we show up. So you're right in that we aren't thinking originally of how we're going to help the victims, the mental health piece, but more how are we going to help them by securing the scene, making it safe, and then transitioning to that next step.
You know what makes so much sense about that, Steve, is as I'm trying to transition, because I know a lot of behavioral health people listen to the podcast, just a lot of different professions on the behavioral health healthcare side of it. For me, when I hear you say that, it reminds me of literally the function of what triage is about. If somebody comes into, the ER and they've sawed off their leg with a chainsaw, they're not thinking about necessary comfort. They're just trying to stop the bleeding. And it's just such a triage moment. And I think that when I heard you say that, I think it helps my brain think of the professional worldview I come from as well. That's triage. It's health and safety first. Like that's literally health and safety before you're thinking about patient comfort. Like it's literally, we need to stop the bleeding first, and then we can get into, as we triage down from there. So that's my translation that I think is really helpful when you're looking through that lens. If you would talk a little bit too, because there was a moment when the first training I remember you going through, before I even knew you, there was a moment, and it's a moment that just stood out in my brain, where Jan Takamoto was, we're doing a role play. She's suicidal, really in that role and doing an excellent job, kind of on the edge of a bridge. And you were with a team who was trying to really, we're practicing empathy, and it just wasn't happening. Like it just, like there was, I could just see people fidgeting, and some of the officers fidgeting. I'm just trying to, we'll get her off the edge and then we'll do MI. We'll get her off the edge and then we'll do MI. And it's just like, they couldn't get that. And then something clicked in your brain. And I physically, because I remember squatting down on next to the desk, because she was on this, supposed to be a bridge, she's sitting on the edge of a desk. And I remember squatting down and kind of watching you guys operate, and something in your brain shifted. Like I literally could watch it. So would you talk about that moment? Because you and I have talked about that. Jan's talked about that moment. What shifted? Because you guys were all kind of fumbling and trying to figure it out when we're doing that mock scenario. What, bring people up to speed with kind of what was happening for you in the class and kind of in that moment.
Yeah. Like you talk about, this was a classroom setting with a very professional person who is putting herself in a vulnerable spot of being suicidal. I've unfortunately had to negotiate with and try to assist and help people in real life situations very similarly. And sometimes they go great. And sometimes you have to find that person that connects with the person in crisis to get that. In this classroom setting with Jan, you're exactly right. It's tough to replicate a real life situation,
Yes.
but I think we got as close as we can in a training environment that I probably have ever been a part of. And I think what happened is, originally I've got a goal of working with with Jan, who is suicidal, who's going through some family issues, and I'm trying to help her take her off that ledge, right? Both ledges, that she's dealing with, the ledge of the bridge and the ledge that she's dealing with in the behavioral mental health piece. And so I think I've got in my mind, this is how it should go. And a lot of times law enforcement and physicians, educators, everybody has their mindset of, this is my game plan, and it's going to go just like this, A, B, and C, and then it's going to work out.
Yes.
And when it goes from A to C and you miss B, and it's like, well, that wasn't a part of the plan, right, Casey? That's not supposed to happen like that. I think what happened in that environment was, at one point I had a group of, I had two other negotiators with me, and we were talking to Jan, and we were trying to just find that little, I guess, crack that we can get into and just relate, just as humans relate with her as she's going through a crisis. We're not going through the crisis. We're not living the crisis that she is, or in the real world, what the people are. And so in this situation, remember you and I chatting on the side for just a second about just showing that empathy and really just being in that scene with her and trying to understand even just a fraction of what she is going through. And what I think clicked for me was just realizing that this wasn't hostage negotiator, SWAT commander Steve Wohl doing A, B, and C to get her help
Sure.
and to get her there. It was Steve and Jan talking through real life situations to try to get a common ground where I could really empathize and almost feel what she's feeling. I think that that's where MI really comes into play. Is once that happens, it was a it was almost like something came over us in that we. I almost felt like afterwards, this was a real life situation where I just wanted to hug her and take her up to
Yeah.
the hospital and be with her to walk her through that crisis that she had been in. And I think when you can connect with somebody, and I think that's where MI comes in and helps us, is if you can connect and not necessarily, you're not having the same emotions and feelings and the visceral, concern that they're having, but if you can connect on a different level and almost, I hate to use the word win them over, but almost partner with them as you're trying to walk them off that ledge, both the physical ledge and the mental ledge that they're on, and make that connection. And that's where MI really helps, is making that connection and realizing what we have to do to make that transition and connect them to where we can actually bring them back to us and make them or help guide them down the path to recovery from their crisis.
Steve, one being there and watching that, the way you articulated was it just, I mean, it was such a great kind of narrative of what I watched go down in that moment. Because I think people can think role plays or they can think a mock scenario. And I think that's what it was prior to that moment, is three officers in a training who got the material, were displaying what they'd learned, and somebody that was doing a phenomenal job embodying the complexity of it. And the role play of the officers practice was not lining up with the depth of despair of the person that was suicidal. And I was watching that despair because, I mean, there's three officers standing in front of their classmates, performing, a role play. And there was that moment when you and I talked, and then you step back in, and I remember the moment so vividly. And I think what you just said was so important, is that connection that happened, because in that moment, all of her defenses melted. All of your like you said, the law enforcement side of you kind of melted in that moment. And it wasn't a kumbaya moment. It was a moment that she felt heard, she felt seen, and she felt understood. Because as soon as that came out of your mouth, I saw her face drop down and she almost got emotional. And then she diverted her eyes to me like, oh my God, like it was almost like her shoulders slumped in that moment. It was such a real moment. And I think that's the thing that was so odd, that it transcended the role play of what you were talking about. That it's like, I get how this person, like I can feel how this person feels, and that person felt, this person feels how I feel. And in that moment, that's what we look at in MI, of where resistance or discord completely washes away or dissipates, because now it's not a tension moment. Now it's a massive ambivalence moment. And I think that to me is what's so fascinating, the way you deconstruct that, of looking at, with all the violence, there's health and safety that are not MI moments. Compliance is compliance for officer safety, for civilian safety, for victim safety, all those things. That's just fundamental from a triage perspective. But then there's this, are there moments where that resonance with two people can happen, and the tension starts to melt away a bit? And I think that, to me, there's just something that happened in that moment that was just, it was fascinating to watch, because it was a moment. I mean, it wasn't a role play, it was a moment that happened there.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I've been in real case situations where we've been negotiating with people who are either suicidal, who are homicidal, or have committed crimes, and now they've kind of come to the end of their rope of what they're going to do. And it takes a while to build that rapport, like you talk about. A lot of times you can throw training and you can think back of all the things you've done, the steps. Here's what I need to do. But at that time, all that is kind of almost out the window. It's almost incongruent. It's
Yes.
you've got to find that connection. And I think that's where MI comes into place. You learn those steps to build that connection. And then it becomes not negotiator, person in crisis. It becomes two people looking to working together to have a great outcome versus us against them against me,
Yes.
that type of mentality. And in the training situation, I think you nailed it when it was almost like all three of us at the same time went, oh, there it is.
You're
We,
exactly with it.
oh, that right there, what I just said broke down the barriers with Jan, who is now willing to talk to me, let me in a little bit, which brings me closer to her, which builds that that connectivity that we need so that we can get her the help that she's needing at that time, even though it's role play. This goes on in real life every day in law enforcement. And over my about 14 years as a negotiator and a team commander, I listened and saw this on a regular basis where we have the initial button of heads, not negotiator, I'm here to help you, you're going to let me help you type of thing, to building that rapport, building that friendship almost, to where it's like, this is how we want it to go to help you. And once you have that and you have that relationship, it tends to work in our favor, because we're able to really show them that we're there to help and get them the help that they need, and that this is a temporary crisis, not something they can't get over. And that's our goal.
The one thing that I want to, I'm going to own just my own bias. My previous bias against law enforcement. I was never anti-law enforcement ever. I mean, that's just not me. But I just had the same stereotypes that some people have, just like, they're just cops. They're just, blah, 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 blah. And even when I was asked to do the initial trainings, I had my own hesitancy around that, about, I just don't understand the point. This is going to get bastardized in a way that, they're saying they're using MI, and it's just going to be another tactic to do what they do. One of the things that was so profound for me in my depth of understanding of how complex, and I'm still so naive in it, but that really helped my understanding in a different way, is the number of things that you have to assess on scene in microseconds that you are 100% accountable to the victim, to the perpetrator, and to the community, like microsecond things that you're accountable for, and that your profession hangs on these microseconds. Your career hangs on these microseconds. And
Good point.
I'm in, what's that?
That is such a good point. Like, I've never really thought about that, but wow, that is a lot that your brain is having to process in microseconds.
Microseconds.
Just had to say that.
And Tammy, that's what we want to talk about this from an MI perspective, because you think of when we're doing advanced trainings and we're doing skill building, and people just keep talking about, God, MI is so hard because we've got all these things going through our brain. And so I take that MI brain of mastery or proficiency in MI, and all these things we're paying attention to linguistically, of language that we're paying attention to. Now you take that, and now you put everything environmentally that you have to pay attention to. Did you see somebody just got out of the car over there? Are they, like, the view of a horizon from law enforcement, from one particular officer who's exceptional in what they do? They're picking up on environmental cues, like on regions of the scene out in front of you. Like every little thing that flinches or moves, their brain absorbs that and thinks in those microseconds from a health and safety perspective. And now you're trying to think about linguistics, about where's the sustained talk, where's the change talk, where's the resistance talk at the same time. So you have to be in this moment, is what we expect from an MI perspective. And that's negating everything in the environment that involves all these other people around at the same time, from a health and safety microseconds that they have to pay attention to. So that was, for me, once I was able to kind of integrate from an empathetic way of looking at it from a law enforcement perspective, and why there was initially an initial kind of pushback against, I don't think that works for the world we work in, because there was a lot of that pushback. There continues to be that pushback in law enforcement at times, like, that's not part of our world. I think that's, for me, was the high empathy side of going, my brain can barely comprehend what they have to assess when they arrive on scene. And not only what they assess when they arrive on scene, every microsecond of environmental factors that are going on that they have to make decisions about, that are being filmed. We can't get people to audio tape themselves to submit, to get feedback from motivational interviewing. Law enforcement officers have cameras strapped to them. They're measuring and monitoring every single thing they do. behavioral health people wouldn't allow that to happen because they don't want to be monitored to that level for
Yeah,
liability. Law
our,
enforcement doesn't have that
our
opportunity.
clinical settings are so different, right? I mean, when you're dealing with somebody in a clinical setting, it's pretty sterile, it's pretty controlled. We don't get that luxury always, right?
Right.
I mean, like you said, Casey, we've got body cams. Most everybody has cell phones being recorded, and you kind of nailed it on the head in that we're our brains are slicing things up all the time of where's the threat, where is I need to make this connection and help this person, and they're whether they're in crisis, whether whatever is going on, but if I got all these other stimuli around me that I'm trying to take in and make a decision on, and a lot of times it's seconds. Is that person grabbing that gun to assault me, or is that person grabbing the gun to get rid of it because he doesn't want to have a deadly encounter or bad situation? And my brain is trying to figure that out in seconds, milliseconds of what's going on. And so it's funny to have friends in the law enforcement side, which I do, of course. And it's funny to have friends that are non-law enforcement when we can be out and I see things or observe things or see suspicious activity together as a group, and people don't even see that. That's just not how they're trained. And I'm not trained like a physician or an educator to look at ways to teach and to do this surgery and to do that. My brain is taught a different way, and so a lot of times it's how we train each other and how we work is incongruent. It is what it is, and our environments are so different. So yeah, I can see how you would view, especially with the media and everything, law enforcement and how, it's just my way or the highway and what's shown on TV, when, as you know now, dealing with
Yes.
CIT and the
Yeah.
classes we put through, and some of the our officers, especially here in Spokane, are some of the most well-trained to deal with people in crisis. We do this through repetitive reality-based training and bringing in professional people like Casey and to do these type of things, so that we can teach them, so we have the favorable outcomes. So we, in that millisecond, we hopefully make that right choice and potentially save somebody versus
Well, and
like going the other
this
way.
is what I think is so interesting too. You know what? I like what you talked about. When you think of 50s and 60s, they were opposite end of the spectrum, and now this merging. I've done some of the co-deploy, I've done ride-alongs, because I wanted to get that perspective as well too. And what's what was helpful for me is because that became so much more clear. There is always going to be a delineation between law enforcement and behavioral health, as there should be. There's a delineation. You're not social workers, that's not your job. But the community safety and peace officer side of it very much starts to blend there. And I think that's the part of the Venn diagram that's so fascinating, where these promising practices are starting to converge. Because what I think of is when I would do the ride alongs, it's like, oh my God, motivation would work so well in this domestic violence situation. Like this would be like, if you guys knew this would be such an excellent outcome. And there's other scenes that we arrived on that I'm thinking, yeah, this is not relevant. MI is not relevant here. This is a health and safety. This is a community. This is just, it's not an MI moment. But the merger, like my ultimate moment of merger is of when, in those seconds when they're reaching for the gun, that the brain is so well trained that you're listening to the language and being able to assess the language from a resistance sustained change talk perspective, and trying to weave more of that in. The complexity that I look at with that is, not only are you, my brain goes into watching Steve juggle 18 balls. What he normally is doing is juggling 18 balls. And now I'm throwing 8 more in there when you're thinking from an MI lens of linguistics and how you track linguistics. So is it impossible? No. Is it something to try to strive towards? I think that's where I get excited and get fascinated on this hybrid of, and is that going to have an impact on outcomes? Because it's not my attachment to everybody learning MI. That's not my attachment. My attachment is to better outcomes for all. And if even 3 of those balls or 2 of those balls get thrown into that 18 balls that law enforcement juggles, and there's 2 or 3 MI components that get tossed in there, and all of a sudden use of force is reduced by another 40%, or that these situations that more often not end in violence or death, that those are reduced greatly because of this interaction that we can measure and look at. That's my obsession with what you're talking about. These ends of the spectrum are actually starting to merge in the middle. And I think that cross section with these evidence-based practices, even beyond motivation, obviously, that law enforcement gets, engages in, that to me is just, to be part of that history that's being written right now, to me is just mind blowing.
Yeah, you said something that I wanted to touch on, Casey, in that in your mindset, your outcome is to make sure it's safe for all people, right? That's law enforcement's number one outcome as well.
Exactly.
We're all on the same page. It's a matter now
Yes.
of having the tools and the abilities to have that safe outcome. And in law enforcement, we're just put in those situations more than the normal person is, right? The guy who's driving the tanker truck or delivering groceries. We're just put in those situations more and more, but we have the same outcome. We want the same things, and that's why we do the trainings and do the things we do. And you're just in an environment where you get to see that more, especially with the body cams that you see, and you
Yes.
get to see the work that our guys and gals do out there, really to get
Yes.
the same outcome that you would want, that they would want,
Yes.
that their mother would want. You know?
Yes. And the thing that I can look at, Steve, objectively, or as objectively as possible, is the missteps that I see in law enforcement from a MI perspective are no different than the missteps that I see from physicians or nurses or mental health professionals or addiction specialists that submit audio tapes to us. Like, the missteps are the missteps because they're learning a new skill set. So I think that's the thing that's fascinating too. It's just like, because I get my own writing reflex of, oh my gosh, this could be handled so much differently. It's no different than when John and I are coding tapes and listening to audio sessions of clinicians in practice going, oh my gosh, that was just such a major missed opportunity. Like, this could be a different outcome if you had these skill sets mastered a bit more. So I think that's also that coming together and merging of it, of these evidence-based practices that we know about.
Yeah, for sure.
What I think it'd be helpful thinking about, I think because of where the chaos in the world, so much of the chaos of the world is, and so much around guns and gun safety right now, and violence, is there a situation you can think of that you've been in that was very obviously, this is what we do from a hostage negotiations, this is what we do from a law enforcement perspective, but in retrospect you've wondered, like, kind of what, I just wonder if I ran it through an MI lens, was there other things we could have added to the equation? What I want to say for people who are listening, the way that I look at this and the way I want to ask this to Steve is not from what we did wrong or what we could have done better. There's a quality assurance that we know that what was done was right, and then continuous quality improvement for I think for any human or any behavioral professional is, we hit the mark where we needed to mark, and then how do we want to take it to the next level? That's my curiosity for you. Is there a scene you can think of or a situation we're in there? It's like, yeah, I know we handled it well per protocol. And then when I run my brain through an MI lens, I wonder if I had a different skill level, or if it was a little higher in MI. I wonder if this part of it could have been different. Is there anything you can think of?
Yeah. One comes to mind that I think it happened. I'd have to look at the tape, but maybe 2017, 2018. We had a long, drawn out negotiation with a gentleman in crisis who had a gun, and he had about, I think there was 2 women and a child, or a couple of children, inside this home on North Crestline up here in Spokane. And this was an all night negotiation where we felt like we would, as I look back and listen to the tapes, we negotiated, we really went through everything that we could to get this guy to give himself up so that we could get the people inside out safely. And then all of a sudden it would take a left turn and we'd be back to ground zero. And then we'd have to build that back up. And we just didn't know if he was playing with us, what was going on. And mind you, we'd been on there for a long time. So we had tactical units there. I was both the SWAT and hostage commander at that time. And so I was in a command post and I could listen. I had my negotiators. I could listen to what the conversations were. And you would feel like you would start making ground. I mean, he was just still resistant to everything, and we just couldn't get it there. Ultimately, in the end, I think after about 11 or 12 hours, the decision was made where we ended up doing an explosive breach and going in tactically and getting him in custody when we had that window. We could view into the house, and we knew he was away from everybody, and it was a tactical situation that ended beautifully. We got him in custody. Nobody was hurt. Ended up, it was a great outcome. But I look back and I think, could we have talked him out of the house or really gotten to him through the MI piece that we didn't? Where did we miss where potentially, had we gone in and something bad happened, he took his own life, whatever, any negative outcome, we would have looked back and said, okay, what could we have done different? In this situation, great outcome. The tactical team, the negotiators, everybody down to the decision of making the decision to go, it was done right. But ultimately at that time, when it falls on my shoulders as the tactical commander to say, okay, you've got the green light to go, we're going to make this go. If it ends bad, we're going to look back and say, what could we have done different? This turned out great, but we look at that as a failure, as in we couldn't talk him out of that house and had to go in there by tactical means. And so I always wonder, could we have done something different to have him come out, peacefully give up, then we get those people out safely, and we take away any chance that there would be a bad outcome. And so that probably one comes to mind more than anything on that, Casey.
I think this is a perfect way for us to get this a perfect topic kind of to wind down with, but I actually want to spend some time here with it. Is I think because I've seen and listened to so many of the hostage negotiation videos, and this, I'm going to lay this out ahead of time just as people are listening, is I'm not going from, I think this is right or from a righteous perspective. This is just from my observation from looking from a pure MI lens. So it's not a right or wrong thing. I noticed so many people when I've done trainings for law enforcement, they said, you've got to read Never Split the Difference with Christopher Voss. Like, you've got to read it. So I actually finally read the book. And I can see that mindset from a negotiator, like, international negotiator perspective of this is what we train on these concepts. What's really interesting to me is what you said about the time frame. And then I look at the time frame of the officers that I've trained and why is it so truncated? It's the level of chronicity. Well, we're still talking life and death on some with suicidality and some of the videos that I watch, some of the hostage negotiations I've had lately. But in those hostage negotiation tactics, so much is about building relationship. Whatever you can do to get that engagement or that connection or build a relationship. And what I watch in the videos, and I think this, I'm going to pair with the experience that you and Jan had in that role play, the difference. Building relationship works to a point till the person you're talking to goes, wait a second, this is bullshit. You don't care about me. You're a fucking cop. And then all of a sudden it backtracks again. And then you have to get that, no. I used to play baseball when I was a kid too. My dad smacked me around, and it's, people have been through that. So I hear those, let's relate, which in motivation, for me in motivational learning talk, is the potential for resistance increases exponentially when it's between two people. When it's like, this is my experience. And all of a sudden it's, wait, you couldn't have my experience because you're a cop. You're law enforcement. And then all of a sudden it falls apart again. And then you have to build that back. And then it's like, okay, somebody has to tag team in and take over in that 11 to 12 hours, and see if you can get he has a better connection with them. The difference when I look through an MI lens is that is not an expression of empathy. That's a self-centered conversation. You're talking about yourself in relationship with the individual who has the gun. And there's a chance for it to get connections, but it literally is throwing spaghetti at the wall to see which is going to stick. Which one of us is going to get the best connection with him? And I had connection with him. I just lost it. And I listened to those conversations. And when I look from an MI lens, and again, this is not the way everyone in MI, all MI trainers train it this way, but the way I train it is it's not about building relationship. It's about people feeling deeply heard and understood. And it's that transcendent moment that you talked about with you and Jan, that it was Steve and Jan. It wasn't Lieutenant Wohl and, CEO Jan Takamoto. It was these two human beings in a moment that were like, oh my God, I feel heard and seen and understood. That's different than relating to someone. And so much in hostage negotiations, what I see is this: how do we relate? What's the catch? Where's the hook in there? When I'm thinking about, the never split the difference thought of it, it's where do I find the hook? In motivational interviewing, what it is when do I get inside their worldview to the place that they forget that it's me that they're talking to, and now they're talking out loud about their own brain and their own ambivalence. And as soon as I hear in law enforcement, in those moments where they hear the ambivalence, they want to jump in and fix it and solve it. We can help you with that. Come out here and we'll talk about it. And it's like, and then all of a sudden it's like, fuck you, I don't want to come out and I'm not going to talk about it. And now all of a sudden we lost them again. So that example of me, I think, is such a perfect example when my MI brain looks through the law enforcement lens and the MI lens. And I think, gosh, these are those very narrow corridors where I think that you can see this merger happening as those skill sets continue to increase. And like I prefaced with, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I mean, my MI brain goes, okay, there's the moments. Those moments that are, 12, 13 hours are ones that I think could be reduced with the person coming out saying, I don't want to harm myself. This is so out of control. What am I thinking? And almost having that dialogue outside of his head to be able to see himself and go, I love my children. I don't want to end their lives. I don't want my life ended. Like, I just want this situation resolved, but it feels like there's no option to have this resolved. To have his brain, to be able to get his thoughts out of his head so it's not so trauma informed in his own brain, that he can get it out of there. And it's like, okay, there's where that would be a fascinating mastery to watch that next evolution happen. So, and again, that's purely from my brain, not from a law enforcement brain.
Right. Yeah. And I think we have to realize there are some situations where the person in crisis or the suspect doesn't want help. And we've seen that where they're intelligent, they can play the game, or it's just no matter, they know the ending, no matter what. You can throw everything at them. I could bring Casey to them and have him, do MI and deal with that ambivalence. And Casey's not going to get the outcome that we want because that person has made up that decision. Luckily, the majority of the time we can. But I think you're spot on, Casey, in that there are times, I remember clearly a time on the Monroe Street Bridge where I was talking with a gentleman who was wanting to jump off the bridge. I was there and I was talking to him and I was trying to relate and get that hook into him to get him the help, because all I wanted was him to get off that bridge and get him to the hospital and get him help. But I didn't have that relationship with him. And we switched out in that situation. I switched out with another negotiator at the time. His name was John O'Brien, who Casey, you've worked with and seen stuff. Yes. And he related to him on a different level than I could. And now does that mean I did something wrong? Maybe. Or maybe it just was I didn't have that connectivity with him where John came in. And I remember clearly them talking about their Irish backgrounds. That's where it started. And then it became very similar backgrounds, very similar upbringings, all these different things. And we ended up getting him off the bridge, and John did a masterful job getting him off the bridge, where I just couldn't get that connection that John got with him. And that's what's great about, having multiple negotiators is somebody might have that MI moment where they look at it and that training kicks in and it just connects like it did with Jan and Steve, like it did with John and this gentleman. And so in the end, not everybody is going to want to get the help or put up to break down those walls and let us in. But if we can increase that amount every year, then it's a win. And that's kind of our goal here at the Spokane Police Department and nationally in law enforcement. Our goal should be always to have those positive outcomes, and whatever it takes, training wise, just learning from past mistakes. We're human. We're going to make mistakes. How can we be better next time? That's kind of my mantra is, how can we train and be better next time?
Steve, and the point that you made, that not only that, which I think is just for me, it's just so good to capture this conversation because I think it's absolutely vital that we have these kind of conversations. It's also the piece of the way that I think it's so clear when we have these conversations to understand where does MI work and when does it not work? When is it not appropriate? And even what you just said, what I always tell people in training, if there is 0.00000 ambivalence, motivation won't work. My nutty little brain is if there's even 0.1 ambivalence somewhere in their brain, I'm rubbing my hands together going, I want to get access to that part of the ambivalence and see, can I tease that out more? And that's why I want to reinforce what you had said. If there's 0.0000 ambivalence, it's a done deal in their brain, and this is just cat and mouse. And they know what the end is going to be. Motivation is not a tool. It's not an effective tool. It doesn't work in those situations. It's not indicated, and it doesn't work. The exploration to see if there's even 0.1 ounce of ambivalence inside of their brain, is that to me is such a high level of trying to exercise that and tease that out to see if it exists. But if it's zero ambivalence, motivation doesn't work, because their behavior is in alignment with what their values or their goals are. And there's nothing, and that's when I train people, I tell them, then what do we have left if it's not behavior change? Then we have to shift to compliance if there's no ambivalence. And to me, it's like, that's why, there's this marriage, but this separateness between motivation and law enforcement, that there is a separateness. There's still two separate entities, but there can be this kind of marriage between the two, where it's like, God, there's a good working relationship. And there's times that, I'm this parent and you're this parent. That's just the way life is. And I think it's the same in law enforcement. When there's zero ambivalence going on, our default is compliance, then, as it should be. And when there's ambivalence, then we should be working towards behavior change.
Yeah, and when those axis crosses, like we talked about, when it crosses like it did with Jan and I, or other situations I've been on, that's when it's like, oh boy, this is, if we can do this every single time, we need to replicate this. This works. Like you said, there are some people that it's not going to work. There's no ambivalence whatsoever. There's none.
Right.
But when you use it, whether you in a training environment use it on a training person, or you use it at home with your children or your spouse, and you see how it works, and you go, wow, this stuff's cool. This is magic, right?
It is magic.
That's where it goes. And then you teach your wife, and then she starts using it on you, and it's terrible. I give in, and it's terrible.
And what's ironic is your behavior still doesn't change, Steve.
No,
so I'm going to work with things.
I've got zero ambivalence, Casey.
Thank you so much for this. Was so productive. I mean, I could do this for hours, but I think this is, I love doing these podcasts, but this one for me is just like, this feels really, really good. I'm just glad we were able to get this captured, and I want people to be able to hear this. I just think there's so much value right now for people to listen to this.
I just thank you guys for allowing me to come on. And I guess I want everybody to know, you include everybody, that in law enforcement, in our world, like you said, there's a lot of distrust and just, media and stuff. Ultimately, our goal is to have that happy ending every single time. And we train that way. We that's why we, brought you in, and that's what we want. Our goal, we're all on the same page, and we're all on the same team. And so it's a matter of putting the right people in the right spots to get, the training and the education, and to see this stuff succeed. That's ultimately our goal. I know it's your goal. And so these type of podcasts, these discussions are so needed and so important. So I just appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to come on here.
And I appreciate you accepting that. It's just been wonderful for me. So thank you for that.
You bet.
All right, John.
Well, thank you, Steve, so much. There's so many things that I'm not going to say that I have curiosities about or things to comment on, but I will just say your point I do want to bring up. I'd be remiss to not say having multiple negotiators and different, even emotional intelligences, like level of Casey's emotional intelligence with empathy versus maybe another officer, the difference in life experiences, and even cross-cultural things of empathy coming in, or another officer relating to another type of a person that is in trauma or something like that. I just really want to give voice to how critical that could be for anyone listening to this that is dealing with a lot of different situations, different negotiators, different levels of empathy, and really just trying it out and seeing what works for you. So anyhow, that being said, Steve, super educational for me. I know I learned a lot from you, so thank you for giving me more empathy into your world, and hopefully everything stays healthy for you and your team and everyone there. And I don't have anything more. Is there anything else for you, Tammy or Casey, that you'd like to throw in before we wrap up?
Steve, if people want to connect with you or the Spokane Police Department, is there a good way for them to connect with you guys?
Yeah, we've got our public information office unit. We deal with a lot of requests and connections, and we've got Facebook and got different avenues. Our director in charge of that is Julie Humphreys with the Spokane Police Department, but we're on the internet, right? So people can reach out to us, and we can connect that way, and we'll continue to strive to provide the service that people deserve.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you.
Julie said that you can find Spokane Police by searching at the Spokane PD or Spokane PD on either Facebook or Instagram. So
Thanks, Tammy.
All right.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank
All
you.
right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Communication Solution Podcast. As always, this podcast is all about you. So if you have questions, thoughts, topic suggestions, ideas, please send them our way at casey@ifioc.com. That's CASEY@ifioc.com. For more resources, feel free to check out ifioc.com. We also have a public Facebook group called Motivational Interviewing Every Day. We have an amazing blog, and we have lots of communication tips on our website. In addition to all these amazing resources, we do offer online public courses on our website on motivational interviewing and effective communication strategies. Thanks for listening to the Communication Solution by IFIOC.